All right, hello and welcome. My name is Jacob Norlock. I am the Senior Vice President for SPT USA, and welcome to today's session, which is GPS technology used in high school soccer, specifically within the state of Texas. I'm joined by my co-host today, Coach Fred Kaiser from Liberty High School Boys Soccer out of Frisco, Texas. Fred, welcome. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody about your program?
Sure. My name is Fred Kaiser. I'm head boys soccer coach here at Frisco Liberty. I've been here since school opened, so going on, I think, 14 or 15 years now. As you can see up on the screen there, I've been fortunate enough to have some really stellar talent that's come through here. Very high level of play here in North Texas and in the Frisco area. I mean, having wonderful players makes any coach look good. So I've been really fortunate with that, and just trying to push the program forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, excited to be able to talk to you today. Last year at the TASCO session down in Galveston, had the opportunity to sit down with the Smithson Valley coaches and learn a little bit more about how technology, like what we're going to be talking about today, has influenced their program, changed their players' mindset, and ultimately helped them achieve some of their goals they're after. So we were able to hear from kind of a girls' side last year, and excited to be able to hear from your side just how this type of technology has fundamentally changed what you do, or just reinforce some of the things that you've been doing for a long portion of your career. So one of my first questions as we kind of dive in here, Fred, for you is, before we go there, take one quick step back and make sure that I tell folks about SPT. For those of you who may not know, we are a company out of Australia, came about 2014, 2015. I have actually led the charge of us into the United States. Where we're at today is about 112 different countries across 50,000 users and about 5,000 teams. We'll talk a little bit more about what we do, but that's just kind of a brief overview about our company. So let's talk about life before GPS tracking. Before you guys had any level of technology within your program, of course, you've used something like video, and that's somewhat a staple across many teams within Texas. Obviously, video gives us a kind of an in-depth knowledge of what happened, and we can evaluate off of that. But I'd love to hear, what was life like for you evaluating the performances of your athletes before you implemented a GPS tracking program?
Prior to GPS tracking, I kind of ran into the same issue that a lot of coaches have, which is going a lot off of gut. You mentioned bringing film in there, and film is very beneficial. The issue with film is you can only see generally what's going on, at that one area where the ball's at. You're not really getting a real holistic picture, especially in games, of what your players are doing. So just going off your eyeballs and going off your gut, it's over time, I think you develop those skills, but when you don't have any metrics to show anybody, it's really kind of a pain. You can always tell your players, hey, I noticed this or I saw that. But it's very difficult to show them when the film, you're watching a player that's off the ball doing something or not doing something, and the film doesn't capture it. So a lot of gut feelings when it came to all that, and no real hard data.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I mean, there's a level, I'm sure, as a coach. Obviously, you're the authoritative figure that's on the field. You're the coach. But at some point, when a coach tells an athlete that they may not be working hard, the athlete might respond and say that, yes, I am. So in that type of situation, there is a level of maybe not clarity when it comes to how an athlete feels that they're doing comparative to what a coach sees, or their gut or their intuition would tell them, and almost leaves us a little bit of an impasse on the player coach type of relationship, again, prior to having kind of hard factual numbers to evaluate that accurately. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the players feel that they're working hard, or sometimes they know they're not, but if there's no real way for you to be able to call them on it.
Sure.
It's kind of your word against theirs, and it's maybe, hey, coach doesn't like me, so he's just getting on me. And there's just there's too much gray area there for it to really be impactful. I mean, obviously building relationships with players so they're going to believe what you say is a really big factor into that. But a players, they're going to believe what they see, and so it's hard for them to see your gut instincts and
Sure.
and see what you see.
Well, and just like if we were to be doing speed training and trying to figure out how do we get faster, and we're maybe using a stopwatch to do that, well, we would rely on the numbers that would say, hey, if I'm running a 25-yard sprint, if I did that in a faster time today than I did yesterday, that would suggest at some level I'm probably getting faster. And if we do that over a course of a season, that would indicate to us, hey, we're improving athletically. The challenge with that becomes, how do we take a concept like that and now throw it over a 2-hour in-person game where we're actually playing the sport, not just running in a linear line saying that how fast can I get from A to B, but how do my actual performance statistics relate to what I'm doing during a game session. So one of my questions for you is, when did you first hear about GPS tracking? Let's see if I can move this over here.
I first saw it. I don't know if it was EPL games or Bundesliga or national team, something like that. But I mean, at a professional level, on TV, we're starting to see things that were popping up like heat maps, and things like that. And they were able to, the announcers were able to tell you, okay, you know, this player has run 7.8 miles. I mean, these kilometers, but 7.8 miles or something or whatever that. And you're like, well, that's kind of cool. And so you start doing a little bit more digging on that one. I know there were a couple shoe companies early on that had trackers that were able to go in the shoes and do some of that stuff. And then later, you know, obviously you've got different wearable GPS systems, but that's where it was really brought to my attention, just watching like professional level.
Sure. I mean, when you see, I think for a lot of us too, when you've seen, you know, Messi score a goal and takes off his shirt and it kind of looks like, well, why is he wearing a bra type of thing? And to be clear, we call it the vest or the bro. Yeah, it is something that's a little eye catching just in the design. And there's a purpose actually behind it, the way it keeps the device tight. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I feel like that it's something that we see predominantly at the professional level. And a lot of us high school coaches are looking after, not necessarily to be a professional team, but how do I bring some of those elements into my program to raise not only the competitiveness, but the overall efficiency of my team to be able to compete at the highest level that we can. I mean, we all go out with an intention of trying to win the game, and any sort of competitive advantage in doing so can be helpful in that. One other question I had for you, Fred, is you mentioned when we were kind of chatting beforehand that as a coach now today, like obviously you've got roughly 20 seasons under your belt. I don't know if that's an exact number, but you know, maybe in your younger days, doing a little bit more guesswork to be able to get to that kind of now what you say is an educated guess. So I'd love to hear your perspective on, you know, as a younger coach, what would this technology have been like for you if you would have had your eyes on this 20 years ago?
Yeah, I probably would have progressed a little bit faster than I did. Honestly, I got tossed in it, you know, 20 years ago, soccer, even across the country at the high school level and club level, it's still, I mean, it was big, especially after the World Cup that was played here. But in terms of coaching, coaching education wasn't as widespread. And so I was really thrown into the mix. So I relied a lot on, you know, things that I was told by my previous coaches, but also from my playing experience. The issue with that is, you know, growing up, I was mostly a back. So when I'm looking at training sessions and looking at expectations, I looked at it initially from, okay, this is what I know as a center back or an outside back.
Sure.
So the expectations for fitness level were a little bit different, and obviously, you know, depending on your formations and things like that, being able to compare a defender to a midfielder or a forward or something like that, you know, it took me a little while to really comprehend the different levels that the players had to have in order to be successful, especially in terms of fitness at each of those positions.
Sure. Well, and again, that's something you've learned over time, but like we said, some of those factual numbers can be helpful as we kind of get there. try and move this around here so that we don't cover anything up. So what I want to kind of share with people before we dive into more your experience on bringing this in and how it's impacted your program is just to give folks who maybe don't have as good as an overview or a background what we're talking about. Some might know that, hey, I know that I've got GPS tracking in my car or on my phone. I'm not really sure how it's used within the world of sports, specifically within soccer. So just as a quick overview for those of you who may not know, GPS tracking is a small wearable device that players wear in a vest during athletic performances. That can be trainings and that can be games. And the purpose is to be able to identify some key athletic measurements. And for a lot of ways, we can keep players accountable by their effort level, understanding some of those key things about how they're performing day in and day out. We can make sure that our athletes are in peak condition leading up to mid-December when we actually kick the season off. We have a very long preseason leading up to that. So how do we make sure that we're in shape and ready to go? When we are playing, GPS tracking and the data that it outputs can actually help us reduce our risk of injury. Again, providing some valuable metrics on when athletes might be susceptible to hamstrings or quads or groin, some of those soft tissue injuries. It can also help athletes get back. We can't say that we could always reduce an injury or eliminate injuries completely, but when injuries do happen, help getting athletes back safely and efficiently, and also identifying talent. I mean, you mentioned being able to look at an entire field where you might be focused more on the forwards and something happening over here with your defenders. This gives the ability to see the whole field kind of in one view, which is obviously extremely helpful for a coach. So let's talk about you, Fred, and what are some of the key factors that ultimately led you, go back, I don't know, it was a year and a half ago or so, but when you first decided, I'm going to invest in this for my program, I see this as a value add and can help me. What were some of the key reasons that you decided to bring GPS into your program?
Honestly, the first one was the accountability aspect of it, and I think on the previous slide it showed that. When we're running our practices and things like that, one of the first things that happens after practices and then after every game is we'll post the results on the board for all the players to see.
Okay.
Again, when we talked previously mentioned, instead of having to go with my gut to say is little Timmy or little Johnny working, now we've got some hard data. So that part's been really, really beneficial. That was the initial part of it, is it gives me the data to say you're not working or you are working. So, the data is right here. So it's no longer a gut reaction. We actually have actual metrics that are showing the work rates of the players, the distance covered, things like that. And you're able to compare them, obviously across positions, but also within their position to see what's going on. So for us, that first one was really just an accountability aspect of it.
Did you see any, and I ask this because I get this reaction from a lot of other coaches, I'm curious from your perspective, did you see any psychological effect from your athletes now knowing that they were being tracked and that you were ultimately going to look at the data and the data was going to be posted? Was there a response from the kids ultimately knowing that there was quote unquote no more hiding?
Yeah, I mean, and that was a part of it. It's very interesting responses. Obviously, there's no more hiding. We are tracking. We're tracking improvements. We're tracking the work rates and things like that. But the kids like seeing their names up on the board, and it's when the results pop up there. Whoever the top player in each category, they have a little box around that, so that highlights it. So you have a lot of competition that just kind of flourishes. So it's gotten to the point where many times now I don't even have to say anything once the information goes up on the boards, the players know.
Yeah.
So it's now the players getting on top of each other when it comes to some of those things. You got some of your leaders within the program who are saying, hey, we really need to be picking it up. This isn't going to work type thing. So it's raised the level of performance just from that aspect of it. So it's the point where I don't even need to have those conversations with the players anymore. They know now if there's trends and things like that. There's things that we look at too. It's injury prevention, like you said, maximize performance and things like that. But I mean, now the players, either A, they're motivated to because they want to see their name at the top of the leaderboard at something,
Sure.
or B, they're holding some of those players who are maybe not having the best practice or best game. They're holding them accountable, and it means a whole heck of a lot more coming from the player than it does from an old main coach.
Well, I think that says so much about what this can do for just the chemistry of a program. And yes, you talk about transparency and accountability between player and coach, and now we're taking this to a whole another level where we have inner squad accountability, where we have athletes who are wanting the program to achieve obviously great success, and knowing that the only way we get there is as a collective unit. And ultimately, we're only as strong as we are as a group. And so, for having some of your leaders to look at the data and be able to see, hey guys, like today wasn't good enough, or hey, today was awesome. We need to keep at this level because we know other programs are working, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But ultimately, being able to show, how players step into that leadership role. Again, the psychological effect I think has been something that sounds like very beneficial for you guys in your program. Okay, so one of the things we were talking about before that really interested me, and I'm not going to say this is only a Fred Kaiser thing, but it's certainly one that you have made a high mention of, is how you've been able to use certain of our metrics within GPS tracking to help drive a certain style of play. And one of those is impacts. And for those of you who may not know what that means, impact is any time that you have a collision at 5.5 Gs or more. So tell me a little bit more about how you have used impacts within your program.
A couple different ways. At first, we were looking at it. We were honestly just really focusing on our goalkeepers, just to see how much they were getting hit and getting knocked around, things like that. Obviously, your goalkeeper is a very vulnerable position, and they tend to have a lot of impacts, especially compared to other players in the field. That's just the nature of being a goalkeeper. You're making a dive, so you're hitting the ground, and there's a good chance that it's going to be there as an impact. So initially, like I said, we were using it for our goalkeepers just to kind of keep an eye on our goalkeepers to see. Do we need to rest this goalkeeper a little bit longer? During the week, and most programs here in the state of Texas, you're playing 2 games a week. So once you get into the season, it's either a rest day, it's a rest or recovery day outside of your game days. But getting into the preseason or prior to the season starting, when the school year starts, that's one of those things we're able to monitor. It's like, hey, Johnny had a lot of impacts the other day. Maybe it's maybe we're going to rest him now, and we weren't planning on it. Like I said, we started with the goalkeepers, but then we started really focusing on data that came from defenders, okay. And not necessarily, I guess, defenders, just other players on the field, and just seeing, like you said, what their style of play was. Are they mixing it up? Surprising. I had last year. The highest number of impacts didn't come from my goalkeeper, even a defender. It came from a central midfielder who was just mixing things up as much as he could, and then also had a 7 as well. My left flank there that was also really starting to get involved, and just knocking people around. So, or getting knocked around, depending on the situation on that stuff. But just noticing that level of aggression, where they're at, how's it, are we getting more cards as a result of it? Am I not utilizing this player in the proper position? Maybe it's someone who really likes that physical impact and really wants to do things, and maybe they're better served at a different position.
Sure.
Again, depending on your style of play, are you mixing in your defenders in, or do you want your forwards going up and smacking into everybody? Or in that case, it was our central midfielder who was just a lot of balls in the air and then ended up on his bottom a lot. We were able to start looking, are we utilizing players in the proper way?
Right. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So another part that you mentioned this earlier, and I want to dive into it a little bit more, but the ability to look at different position groups and be able to analyze based off of those players that play that position. And kind of, you just said it when it relates to impacts, but like, are these players in the right position groups based off of the data? So would you mind sharing with folks a little bit more about just in general, how you've been able to utilize data to analyze players across different positional groups?
Yeah, there's several different ways we've been able to do that. The first one, like I said, is just within the group. Um, if I have, depending on my formation, if I'm running a 4-3-3 where I have my outside backs who I want attacking, that's one of those things where we're able to tell either through the heat maps but mostly through your distance and also your work rate is who's making those runs down the field.
Sure.
If I want to have my left back making runs all the way down and serving the ball from the opposing 18, I'm going to want to see some distance on that. It also allows me to compare my right backs to my left backs. And just say, hey, the left side really seems to be working a little bit more than the right side, or vice versa. And then when we're making substitutions as well, generally it's limited minutes, and then the starters get back in. But we're also able to judge. It's like maybe this player coming off the bench as they're going onto the field, their work rate is really super high for the amount of minutes that they're getting. Maybe they need to start cracking the starting lineup. So I've also used it to, it's like in some instances, it's like, why is my center back have a more total distance than my center midfielder?
Yeah.
So that's one of those things where, where the total distance and the hard running things there can come into play. Also helps us too if we're looking at our forwards, depending on what our expectation is for those players. Are the players making the runs that we want? And that's where the heat map comes into play.
Yep.
I really like using that. It's like because you can see on the heat map is little Johnny just running up and down on railroad tracks there the entire time. And we're trying to get him to be, make more crossing runs or run to the corner or something like that.
Yep.
Depending on the time of the game or where the ball's positioned at, you're not able to really see that, but you can go back and you can look at the data and be like, okay, do you see how in the first half all we see here is, it's pure red. You just ran in a straight line back and forth the entire half versus, the one crossing run that you made that's barely showing up on here.
Yeah. We'll talk about heat maps in a sec.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, and just about the philosophy, like you talked about, like having some of those runs. I want to get into why behind that. I think that's really effective. I'm curious from your perspective, when you were looking at different positional groups, I think that all of us would know in the sport of soccer, like usually our center mids typically have the most distance because they're obviously playing back and forth across the ball a little bit. Whereas we might see more of our high speed sprint efforts either on the forwards and defenders because they're making those spurts towards the ball. I'm curious if that aligned pretty well with your expectations across your program, or if you saw any abnormalities. Again, this is going to be totally program dependent and how your style of play is.
Yeah, sure. In general, that held true for the program. There's one exception last year. I had an outside back that was putting in almost twice the miles and twice the work rate hard runs as anybody else on the field.
Wow.
So that may lead. I don't want to give too much away because I'm going to be playing some people who are watching here, but that might lead to a positional change for that player.
Sure.
Based off their work rate. But it also might be how we might keep them in the same spot, and it changes how we use that player.
Sure.
But when you get that data, it's like, again, you can see when you're watching the game or when you're watching something. You can see where the ball's at, but not being able to get all that data and then going back and then being able to look at it, you're like, holy crap! That he was working his tail off. How can we better utilize that?
Right. So you have the metrics that help kind of bring to light your position groups, understand the positions and players within a position group, so you can see, hey, right back versus left back, who was covering more distance. If they're both about the same, then you would know, okay, playing on my team, a back defender is going to be somewhere around X, Y, and Z measurement units. But if we have a large, discrepancy between the two, there's probably a conversation that needs to be had with one of our ones who aren't performing at that level, and being able to analyze whether that's by minute intervals or the velocity graph, which we have on the screen here, being able to see those speed indicators and see, hey, why were we not sprinting as much, or how come we didn't cover as much distance? Why did X lead to Y? Those are things that we can now put some actual numbers behind. And I think one of the things that you talked about is the heat map. So this is a perfect time to get into that example. You mentioned, obviously, in a style of play, having more cross or directional runs. Can we break that open a little bit and talk a little bit more why that's important for you guys and what you're trying to achieve?
Sure. And it's one of the things that drives a lot of coaches nuts, especially when we're working some like younger forwards or younger players on offense, but is when a player just runs vertically, it makes them or only vertically, I should say. It They're easy to mark. If you're running a man defense there, I can just stick a player on you, and I know exactly where you're going to be, or I might be able to ignore you because I know you're going to be sprinting, you're going to be, which is good, but you're going to run vertically, which is going to get you into an offside position. And I don't have to bother with you anymore because you're going to be offside. I mean, you're not timing your runs and things like that. Whereas opposed to players, especially up top, and it depends on your formations, but if you're running two up top and you want your players crossing a lot, now you're going from being able to man mark somebody to, where zonal defending comes into play. And a lot of coaches do zonal defending and man marking just within the game. But now if I'm playing on the right side of the field and I'm making crossing runs to the left side, well, now choices have to be made by defenders. Is the left back just going to continue and run with me? Great. If that happens, then now that just opens up the entire side of the field over there, leaves a giant gap for some of the supporting players to attack. Or it's now, if it's not man, which most people wouldn't do it in that case, but if it's not man, it's zonal defending. Well, now you're forcing the defenders to make decisions. Are they doing a good job communicating? Did that left back tell the center back, hey, you got a guy coming?
Right.
It creates confusion amongst the defenders, and when your defenders are confused, goals get scored.
Yeah.
So again, like I said, with the heat map right here, you can see it. Little Johnny spent all his time over there, and he had a couple of places where he made it over there, but he never made it past.
Literally the
halfway quadrant of the field right there. You could draw a line down there, and the kid never made a run over there.
Right.
Maybe they're running a 4-5-1 or something like that, and this is the guy on the right side or something like that from the first half. So that might be acceptable, but if you're running with two forwards or something like that, then I might question. This is giving you the data to say, hey, you ran a hole through that right side of the field, but how difficult were you to mark? How much confusion were you doing?
Right.
You never made your way. I mean, you never set foot in the center circle, which again might be good or might be bad. It just depends on the formation that you're running, the expectations. But with this is something I could show a player and say, you have activity. It's just not the right kind of activity. Let's be moving with purpose.
Yeah. Well, and being able to have that kind of bird's eye view, right? From the top down to be able to see positionally where you're at. And again, if there's a reason behind it, right? If I can have a conversation with an athlete to say, hey, the reason why is that by actually let's just say they have a zone defense going on, and by splitting that, it gives us the opportunity to make them make the hard decision, which ultimately could lead us to a higher probability of scoring more goals. And then being able to show a heat map that would actually indicate, hey, we ran in a vertical line pretty much the entire game on the right-hand side and never once crossed the halfway point, to be able to draw that defender or expose a potential gap in that defense. That gives a player who's looking at this a little bit more investment and understanding the why versus just, again, Coach Kaiser just kind of beating it to me, and I'm not really, it's not sinking in, or we're not grasping that, which is also probably a metric of education that comes into just our educational system. Like you actually teaching economics to your kids. And having them understand the why behind it will often lead it to be a little bit more sticky in their mind to remember versus just getting up there and teaching course curriculum. You got to be able to make it relevant and obviously have their buy-in into it anyway. Cool. Hey, I wanna wrap up here as we get near the end. You had the fortunate opportunity to do something that probably a lot of coaches don't have the opportunity to do. But I thought it was important for us to kind of highlight what you and a few other FRISCO coaches have the ability to be able to do. I'm going to take a step back here, and I want you to kind of tell folks what you guys did. And then the next slide, we've got some results, which you and I can talk through.
Sure. Like you see here, these are 3 of the 10 FRISCO schools, FRISCO high schools that we have. Us over in Liberty on the far, we're on the far east side, Reedy on the far west side, and the Lebanon Trail right there in the middle. Since all three of us have it, and there are actually a couple other schools, I know Independence has it as well in the district, we got together with a couple coaches and just said, hey, why don't we all run an identical practice? And then we take our data, and then based off that data, we share it with the players, but more importantly, we share it with ourselves just to kind of see where we're at. Our preseason is ridiculously long.
Right.
So, when you're going August through, August through December before
December,
you against somebody else, you kind of like to know where you're at. Are we progressing? Are we not progressing? Things like that. So we got together. We all ran an identical practice. It looks like the data's up there between us and Lebanon Trail there.
Yeah.
The data was really, really good for us to see. So instead of having to just beat each other up, beat our own players up for that 3 months, we were able to have some competition amongst the schools without actually, being around those other schools. So
right.
The data was really beneficial for us. It allowed us to get a snapshot of where we were at the time. I think this is from October of last year. So
yes.
About halfway, halfway, maybe a little bit past halfway of our preseason, and we use the data in different ways depending on what the results were. I mean, first of all, it gave us an opportunity to see exactly where we're at. When compared to another team, since you're running an identical practice to that team. And so for us, one of my players, I was fortunate enough to have a player who was at the highest end of the workers.
Right.
So all his metrics, he killed everybody else, not only on our team, but also on the opposing team. The problem was when you look at some of those averages between those players, if you take out that player's average, our averages were way below what the other team was doing. So we had a much higher high end, but as a whole, their players were further along than ours were. So what that allowed me to have the conversations with my players. It was okay, we got this one player who's doing it, but boy, we got a lot of catching up to do because
yep.
LT over there, look at where they're at.
Right.
And also gave the Lebanon Trail coach the opportunity to say, okay, we're right where we want to be as a team, but we're going to have to step our level up if we're going to be competing with some of those higher end players. So just
right.
having the data and being able to present it to the players and say, this is where we are, this is where we'd like to be, and now we're actually able to give them something other than, well, we look good, we think we're looking good, but how do you know when you're comparing yourself to another team?
Yeah, and again, a very unique situation here where you have coaches all within the same district who agree that this is going to benefit everybody and give us an opportunity to understand holistically how our teams are performing. So again, this is pretty unique in itself, but very interesting to see some of the discrepancy where you've got a player on your team who obviously had high marks across that particular performance and was very much a stud in all regards, beating all other teams within the district that ran that practice. But then seeing that as a team average, we weren't quite there. So psychologically, again, playing to both sides, helping you guys understand that we cannot just rely on one player to get us to our end goal. And likewise, over on the LT side, to be able to say, hey, guys, we are almost there. They have a few players that are outworking us, but as a collective unit, we're really pushing the tempo. Let's continue to do that so that when we ultimately end up playing them, come the next year, we have the best opportunity physically to keep with these guys. All make sense?
Yep.
Very cool. Well, as we wrap up here, one of the questions I wanted to ask you as kind of a final one is, what's next? Have you thought about other technology? One that comes to mind is heart rate. So I don't want to kind of guide our conversation that direction, but I'd just be curious from your perspective as a guy and a part of, handful of coaches that have pushed their teams to utilize tracking services. What's next for your program as you look at the next several years at Liberty?
Well, that's like you said, heart rate monitors out there, which is good. I'm a year into it with this. I think there's still more that I can take advantage of before we progress on too much. But that being said, the more information you have, the more data you have. That's just that gives you an advantage over people who aren't really looking into it. There's lots of other technological platforms and things that you can be utilizing, but when you have data, and if you're willing to actually use that data, that might give you that slight edge that you need. I know in our district, it's really highly competitive across 10 different teams, and the difference between the top end and the low end is really not a huge difference at times. So any little thing that we can use to our advantage, we're always looking to add stuff in. It seems like every year more and more is coming out, and we're able to use more and more. Like we were talking about before, we're going to take advantage of all these little things, because that one piece that gives us that one win that we really need, versus a coach who's not really willing to look into these things. It's like, oh, well, I've been successful with this in the past. Okay, great. I want to make sure I schedule that coach, because that's someone whose butt I'm going to kick, because if they're going to run it the same way, we already know what we already know what to expect from that coach and from that team. Cool. You're just going to keep going, and you're going to remain stagnant. And that's fine. We're going to try and find every little edge we can, and a lot of those edges for us are coming from the new technology that's out there. So. Right. We're always willing to test stuff out. If things work, it works. If it doesn't, at least we learn through that. But that's kind of where we're at on that.
Yeah, and there's always new technology. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that starts at the professional level, works its way down through the collegiate ranks, and ultimately to high school and youth soccer. And so the ability to be able to understand, GPS, as we kind of talked about today, those are some of the external metrics, I think, where a lot of coaches are getting a good grasp on that area, or understanding how that can impact their program. And then looking at the internal measurement units to be able to see, hey, how hard is the heart working? And are we achieving some good internal metrics to be able to understand the physical fitness of our athletes? How quickly do we recover? And are we in a good shape? Like you said, you've got a really, really long preseason from August to December. So how do we make sure that we are actually training with some of these metabolic ideas in mind, to be able to make sure that our circulatory system is actually in the best place possible, so that you talk about that 1% advantage. I mean, that can be the difference in the last 5 minutes of a game, that extra effort, that little extra sprint that you might not be able to do because of fatigue, because you weren't prepared to be able to do so. With technology, with the idea of understanding how you train versus how you play, that ultimately gives a lot of coaches the ability to achieve that at the end. So I think you're right on. I think it's always an ever flowing and changing. There's always new technology that's coming out. So it's exciting to see that you guys have obviously embraced this element, and certainly look forward to ultimately what else comes and what you continue to implement at your program.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your time. If you have any questions, please let us know. Certainly love to have a conversation. Again, thank you, Fred, for your time today and sharing with others just about your use of GPS tracking.
Absolutely.